Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Yeah, welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
It's a rare PM edition. It's like the old days when you got your newspaper after you came home from work.
Yeah, the evening edition, which we're doing, and since I have been taping podcasts all day, it sort of is for me. This is hopefully I've refined some of my talking points, but maybe we'll cover some new ground. But Bill, there's it seems like just a few big stories, obviously dominating everything. And did you get a chance to watch some of the testimony, the Cassidy Hutchinson testimony?
I listened to some of it. I definitely got the high points, uh, and and I saw some of the late news that the Secret Service agent that she said told her about this incident with Trump lunging after the steering wheel of the Beast.
Yeah.
That apparently he's going to testify that that's not what happened. Um, but that doesn't seem to be undercutting the initial testimony because on the surface, Lee, she's a very credible witness.
Right. And so most of her testimony was things that she says she personally witnessed. And she was the aide to the chief of staff, and her proximity to the Oval Office was very good. So she overheard a lot of things. The thing about the Beast, the presidential limo, was hearsay. That's something somebody told her. And I think, though, it is unfortunate because if that's wrong, then it could be used to try to call into question everything else that she said.
There's also this issue of potential witness tampering hovering over this, that evidence that she was pressured by Trump's people to stay loyal. And so if someone else who's in Trump's orbit is saying, oh, that's not true, well, what motivation did Cassidy have to make it up?
Yeah.
And if you know there's pressure coming from one side not to make Trump look bad, who's pressuring Cassidy to make this up? What's her upside?
Yeah. It was so one thing, do you remember when Trump was giving the speech, he kept saying, I'm going to walk with you. We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Mhm.
And then when he didn't show up, I thought, well, this is very Trump like
Mhm.
to lie to his audience, to use them. Obviously, the idea that he's going to be down there would be a motivator for you. It's sort of a permission structure. And then he hangs you out to dry by not showing up. In a way, I felt a little better about Trump in
Mhm.
this regard, that he actually wanted to go. That could have been a very dicey thing if he actually went. But at least I'm surprised. That's the first time I had thought he actually wanted to go to the Capitol instead of just saying he wanted to go.
Well, it's it's not new information that Trump wanted to go to the Capitol. Trump said
Was to
himself.
me.
I mean, I didn't remember this, um, but I'm trying to get the exact. I want to be careful here with exact language. But this is Politico, June 8th. As then President Donald Trump left a rally with his supporters on January 6th, he appears to have held out hope until the last minute, even as chaos unfolded, that he'd be able to join them at the Capitol. Trump even raised the prospect privately with the head of his Secret Service detail at the time, Robert Engel, according to a person familiar with the agent's congressional testimony. Engel rode with Trump in the presidential armored car called the Beast back to the White House after the ellipse riot that preceded that day's violent riot. Engel told January 6th Select Committee investigators that the two men discussed Trump's desire to go to the Capitol and took different views on the topic. Engel noted that they went back to the White House instead of heading to Capitol Hill. The contents of Engel's hearing testimony have not been previously reported. Um, and
Yeah, I missed that, Bill. I missed that last week, or
well,
two or
that
3 weeks
that
ago,
was
whenever that
3 weeks
was.
ago, and I think
I bet you I was on vacation. This is why you should never take a vacation, by the way.
well, I'll be honest
You
with you.
missed stuff.
I'm not following January 6th committee revelations blow by blow.
Yeah.
It's just I haven't been writing about it. I feel like I know the gist as it stands. You have to convince me that Trump was a bad
Well,
actor in all
let
this.
me just go through a couple of my takeaways or things that I think were interesting. One is Mark Meadows really comes out looking bad. I mean, Cassidy Hutchinson describes him. They'll go in and tell him something like, there are people at the Capitol or outside and they've got weapons. And he's just like scrolling through his phone like, oh, have you told the president? He's like he's totally checked out of his job. Trump told Meadows to call Roger Stone and Michael Flynn the day before the attack. Trump demanded armed supporters be allowed into the rally at the Ellipse before he called for a march to the Capitol. I'm reading the Rolling Stone listicle here, by the way. I'll give them some credit.
Can I interject?
We got about the physical. We got about the physical. What's that?
I just want to interject because I found the other
Oh,
Washington
yeah.
Post that's relevant to this.
Go ahead.
This is June 7th, Washington Post. Shortly before pro-Trump rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, Secret Service agents scrambled to try to secure a motorcade route so then President Donald Trump could accompany his supporters as they marched on Congress to demand he stay in power, according to two people briefed on witnesses' accounts to congressional investigators. The hectic events that day followed nearly 2 weeks of persistent pressure from Trump on the Secret Service to devise a plan for him to join his supporters on a march to the Capitol. The agency had rebuffed Trump's early entreaties, but the rushed effort on January 6th to accommodate the president came as Secret Service personnel heard Trump urge his rally audience, nearly 30,000 people, to march to the Capitol while suggesting he would join them. A D.C. official on Tuesday, again, this is early June, confirmed that the Secret Service sought D.C. police to help with a presidential motorcade on January 6th. Quote, we were asked, and the response was no, said Dora Taylor Lowe, a spokeswoman for the D.C. deputy mayor that oversees the police department. And then later on in the piece, Trump previously told the Post that his wishes to go to the Capitol on January 6th were blocked by the Secret Service. But Trump's early insistence on joining a march has not been previously reported, nor was it known publicly that Secret Service officials considered taking steps to transport him there just as the chaotic events were about to unfold. And the Post quotes Trump. In an interview in April with the Post, Trump voiced regret over not marching to the U.S. Capitol the day his supporters stormed the building. He said he pressed to join the march that day, but was stopped by his security detail. Quote, Secret Service wouldn't let me, Trump said. Quote, I wanted to go. I wanted to go so badly. Secret Service says you can't go. I would have gone there in a minute, unquote. Trump defended incendiary comments, urging his supporters to come to Washington, then march on the Capitol and, quote, fight like hell. Quote, I said patriotically and peacefully, he said.
Yeah, it is. I mean, on one hand, I had a number one, Trump lies, so who knows? If I had read that,
what he's saying there lines up perfectly with what Cassidy said.
Yeah.
So
and
maybe
in a way,
there's some tiny detail that the agent's going to say wasn't quite right. Oh, he didn't lunge at the wheel, but that's really not the most germane aspect of the story.
No, but it's like in terms of it's very evocative. And she talks about Trump throwing this ketchup bottle at the wall and the ketchup. And like, that's the least important thing, but it's very evocative. And I think the idea of Trump physically lunging at an agent and grabbing the wheel, if that did not happen, and apparently the agents are disputing that, then even though, again, she was reporting on something she heard someone else tell her, still think
maybe Engel said he was practically jumping for the wheel and like she missed the qualifier or something, I think there's enough here to say she's not making stuff out of a whole cloth. There's a lot that is corroborating from what we previously knew to what she is saying.
Yeah, it's not good. You mentioned the witness tampering stuff, which is obviously like obstruction of justice and all. It's not good. Yeah, overall, I think that it's probably, would you say, the most damning in terms of the most Trump's worst day of the January 6th committee. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I would think so. Again, I don't know if it, does it matter? Does it matter
Yeah.
politically is always the question. I mean, I think it certainly matters historically. We're getting a very complete picture, I think, of what happened, where he's not going to look good in the eyes of history. And I can't readily say, does it affect the midterm? Does it affect 2024? But we have other data that Republicans are a little, there's some desire amongst Republicans to move on, to turn the page, let's check out this DeSantis guy. And it might just be one more brick on the pile saying, we love you, Trump. You let us overturn Roe. Bang up job, guy. But we want a new chapter to the story.
That's what I wrote about this week at the Daily Beast, Bill. I think that Ron DeSantis is the biggest winner of the January 6th committee hearings for that exact reason. I don't think it's Democrats. I don't think it's Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger. I think it's DeSantis. And it's because I don't think Republicans are going to disavow Donald Trump or there's not going to be that moment, that cathartic moment. Have you no decency? Like that's not going to happen. I think it's going to be people, like an erosion of support where they'll say, like, we love Trump. Bill, we've talked about this, the CBS News montage after the day of the Georgia elections. Like, we love Trump, but we're not going to vote for the person he wants us to vote for. Well, it's like, we love Trump, but it's time to move on. We love Trump, but Ron DeSantis is younger and has less baggage. But I can just see people, maybe they won't say that, but making that calculation.
I mean, we don't have a ton of data here, but we have that one New Hampshire poll that had DeSantis a couple points up over Trump amongst New Hampshire Republicans.
Yeah. And by the way, when they were in the field for that poll, it was after the first January 6th hearing and during number 2 and number 3 hearings. So I'm not saying that correlation equals causation, but it is interesting.
I'll say one other thing that's sort of tangential to this. So we had another election denier lose a Secretary of State primary on the Republican side, Tina Peters in Colorado. And we now have had 9 contested Secretary of State primaries where that had election deniers in the mix, and deniers lost 7 of those 9. They've only won in Nevada and Alabama. Now, of course, Nevada's a swing state, so if Jim Marchant actually wins the general, that might be disturbing to people. But I should also note that we have 2 other.
The Niners sounds like a good sports franchise name, especially in the era where you're moving away from like the Indians, the Washington Deniers.
Colonizers, Matt. Settlers, hoaxers. We do have 2 other states. New Mexico has a denier running for Secretary of State who was unopposed in the primary, and Michigan Republicans are on the verge of nominating a denier in an internal party process. They don't have a primary system for that race. So we had some on the ballot, but I would think if the Republican Party writ large was hell-bent on not just nominating Trump in 2024, but remaking all the election apparatuses across the country so he would win no matter what the election results were, you would have a bigger field of deniers. I mean, I sometimes see tallies. Oh, deniers are winning legislative primaries. Pennsylvania's, I should point out, Pennsylvania, if the governor of Pennsylvania was a denier, the Republican nominee is, that person effectively is Secretary of State because they appoint the Secretary of State. So that's another case that there's something important happening there. So there's no question there are deniers in the mist. There will be deniers running for offices in various places.
Really bad Sigourney Weaver movie, by the way. Not nearly as good as her other work.
But if this was a real tightly orchestrated conspiracy with broad support in the party, I think you would see a consistent field of deniers at the Secretary of State races, and we're not seeing that.
Well, I guess, Bill, we should probably turn, and maybe this is where we'll spend the rest of our conversation, to Roe versus Wade. Your decades of championing paid off finally, Bill. Congrats. You got your wish.
I would not call it my wish, Matthew.
Landmark legislation.
I know for some reason you wanted like to besmirch me on the interwebs. We've talked before. You always seemed to believe this wouldn't be a big deal politically, that abortion has not proven to be a top priority issue with voters. I think that is a premature assessment. I still think it's a premature assessment. I mean, I won't go as far as saying we know it definitely will be a factor.
Let me just correct the record, though. A year ago, I wrote a column for the Daily Beast saying, A, it's very likely Roe versus Wade will be reversed, even though nobody's talking about it. Mm-hmm. B, it's going to be a big deal, and it's going to change everything you think you know about the midterms. And it's going to dominate, and Republicans have no idea how dangerous this could be, even though I'm for it on the merits politically. So that was my initial take. Mm-hmm. But it got revised partially because that the Texas bill, the Texas abortion law, which I thought had a lot of problems, did not. It dominated cable news for like a week. It was big on Twitter. It didn't impact even politics in Texas, really. Never mind the midterm. So I came to believe that the abortion issue is not as big of an issue as it used to be in terms of defining the culture war. Also that people are so, I mean, think of it. All day yesterday, we were talking about Cassidy Hutchinson. We weren't talking about Roe. And then there's 3 months to go between now and the midterm. I
think some people are still talking about Roe. I don't think it totally blocked out the sun there.
Will we be talking about it in 4 months? And if you live in New York and abortion's not going to affect you, and it won't, Roe's, Dobbs is not going to affect you, and it won't. Is that going to be, if you live in California and it's not going to affect you? So the long way of saying,
but the country's bigger than New York and California, and it's bigger. And it's bigger than Alabama, and Mississippi. It could very well be a big deal this election. Florida, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. We got places where things are purple, and in most of those states that I mentioned, you have Republicans in charge pushing severe total abortion bans.
Well, I mean, Florida is going to do 15 weeks, which I think is...
Well, Florida is at 15 weeks.
And I think that's where DeSantis wants to stay. I don't think he's going to change it, is he?
Well, okay, so Florida is a bit of an anomalous situation, but it's worth delving into because we talk about DeSantis so much in 2024.
Yeah.
And as you argue, well, he's the winner of on January 6th. I do think abortion is a very complicating factor for him. I can't say today whether it means he can't win re-election, but let's just go over what the facts are here. So DeSantis got past a 15-week ban, but has no rape or incest exception after that. It's a flat ban after 15 weeks. Forgive me if it has a life of the mother exception. I don't remember that. I know it has no rape or incest exception. Now, Florida's constitution would seemingly disallow this law from going forward. And there's already a court case that's at the lower court level, whether this law should be struck down, and it hasn't been decided yet. But there was a quote from the judge where the state lawyer was arguing how this is okay under what the Supreme Court did, because Roe v. Wade is now null and void, and the judge said it's not about Roe v. Wade, it's about Florida's right to privacy. Now, the Florida Supreme Court is stuck with DeSantis appointees. So it may well be that whatever this lower court says will get overruled by the higher court. And there's also pressure building up from anti-abortion activists to go beyond 15 weeks. Although most don't think there's going to be legislative activity before November, but there's a lot of talk about legislative activity after November, possibly even late November. So that the Democratic gubernatorial nominee, who's not decided yet, they're going to talk about this. You know that the Florida Attorney General nominee is going to talk about this. So it's going to be talked about. I mean, whether it's going to be the issue or a issue, I can't say, but it's going to be talked about come the fall. And I think it's awkward for DeSantis on both sides because Florida's not really known for being a diehard anti-abortion state. But you do have hardcore anti-abortion people who for 15 weeks is not going to be enough. So I don't think it's a given that DeSantis has sort of hit the sweet spot here. He's going to walk a very fine line.
So I guess what I would say is that I don't think any issue can have the staying power in our short attention span news cycle that it once would have had. I also don't think abortion is the dominant culture war issue that it once was. And again, but I will concede this, that I guess the other point I'll make before my concession is the political environment was so strongly Republican, and there are things like inflation and gas prices that I assume will reassert, and that most voters are going to prioritize those issues over Roe. Having said that, as Bill, some political races are very close and things could be decided on the margins. And it's certainly within the realm of possibility that there could be a race that is impacted by this, even if the net effect is negligible. And so, it could be, you could invent a scenario where it keeps Republicans safe from taking the Senate, maybe because it's a razor's edge.
One thing, the Senate might come down to Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, all states where even Georgia and Arizona, which are redder than the other three. We just had an interesting statistical study done by two political scientists that was listed in the Washington Post, drawing from various survey sources, which did a 50-state table of support for abortion rights, and found that 40 of the 50 states you had a majority pro-choice position. And when you look at it, Georgia and Arizona, I'm trying to find Arizona here. They don't give you they put it on a table. They don't give you the exact number for all these things. So it's a little, but Georgia and Arizona are on the majority side, maybe a little below median, but not right at the 50% line. The only states that are below 50 are West Virginia, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Utah, Mississippi, Kentucky, Alabama, Tennessee, North Dakota, Louisiana. South Dakota looks right on the line. So the Senate, I think it's more likely that abortion rights could be a help for Democrats in those key races and help them keep the Senate. The House is, of course, another matter, but we got governor's races, we got attorney general's races, we got state legislative races. How much is it going to impact in these purple places? I don't think you can say pre-Dobbs, well, it wasn't that big of a deal before Dobbs, so it's not going to be a big of a deal now. Like, this is a pretty seismic change. Are we going to see news coverage of people whose lives got upended in these states between closer to election day? We're seeing some in the immediate aftermath already. Does that sustained. We talked about Texas. I think we mentioned this on a past show, and I've written about this. In the past year in Texas, you did not see a big decline in the number of people who actually got an abortion in Texas, because it was a 10% decline from the previous year, because they were either crossing state lines, often Oklahoma or Louisiana,
Right.
or they were getting pills in the mail, and it's very
And that's
hard to
still
crack
gonna
down on the
that's still gonna
pills.
be a factor now.
The pills are probably still going to be a factor. It's going to be harder in the South to cross state lines because you got a fairly contiguous region in the South of total or near total bans. But New Mexico is going to stay open, and even Florida, maybe for an early abortion, you can still go over there. But it's gonna get harder, and I think the stories are gonna become there's gonna I would think there'll be more stories, but that is the wild card factor. What is the actual access going to be like? And what I find a little weird, Matt, I gotta say, is a good number of Republican voices downplaying it, saying, it's not going to be a big deal. You're still going to get it in your blue states. It's not going to be, this didn't actually outlaw abortion anywhere, it just brought it back to the states. I think it's hard to sell that if you are supportive of the decision, that you don't care if people still get abortions, and if the numbers
Bill, I think
the
there
numbers
are.
are even going to go down all that much, because people still, if you want it, you're still going to get it. That's clearly not what's driving the impetus for this decision, because you have other pro-life voices saying, we're not done here. We're going to go all 50 states. We don't want to have any exceptions. This is just the beginning. So it's hard for both those messages on the right to coexist.
Well, but I think there are a couple things. One, there's my, and I'll just use, I know you weren't coming after me specifically, but I'll just use me as a stand-in. I have my political analyst hat where I try to this is the situation. Here's where I think it's going to impact elections or not. And then there's my pro-life hat. Those are two different things. But I would also say that in the pro-life movement, or in the more likely in the conservative movement, there are people who are primarily focused on ending abortion. And then there are people who are just saw Roe and Casey both as bad jurisprudence. And they could make, I think, a case that it should go back to the states, that the states are the laboratories of democracy. States are where this should be decided at the local level. And so I think it is possible, and I'm sure, again, a lot of people, I think, Bill, you're pointing out a certain hypocrisy that is, I'm sure, present in some people, but I think it's possible to have these nuanced views and be intellectually honest.
How many Republicans do you think are going to run in primaries at any level, from city council to president of the United States, on the argument that we've brought this back to the states and we're now going to let the states go in different directions, and that's what we want, and that's the end of the story? Or are they going to run on, I want to make sure that abortion is banned in the jurisdiction that I am running for, regardless of what the jurisdiction is, local, state, national? How tenable it is for a Republican to run a Republican primary saying it's okay if abortion is around in some places?
Good question. I think Mike Pence has already basically come out in favor of a national. I don't know.
Well, to be a little charitable to Mike Pence here, I took Pence's literal words to say he wanted 50 state bans, as opposed to saying, I hereby am for a singular national ban. No, I would, if he's president of the United States and if there's a national ban that's put on his desk, I don't think Mike Pence says, I'm a Federalist and I will not sign this bill. I'm sure he'll sign it. But I thought his literal words were talking about trying to make sure that no one anywhere in the country would want to have legal abortion. And so we want every state to ban it.
I would just say, so based on the way the wind is blowing now in the Republican Party, since the Trump era, there's obviously a more authoritarian strain that is dominant. And so based on that, I will assume that the smart political move now is to go for more, so that if you're a Republican politician, whether you want to do this or not, the smart thing to say is that, okay, now we're going to impose our view on you. Common good conservatism, as it's called. But having said that, Bill, I think that again, just to reiterate, I think it's very intellectually defensible that one could argue that. I mean, I think you could certainly make the case that if life is precious, and if abortion, or if life is precious, abortion is murder, life starts at conception, and we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are entitled to the right to life, then you could certainly make a case that it ought to be national. But I also think you could make a conservative federalist argument, as you noted, that said, like, no, this should be decided at the local level or at the state level. So I think both are reasonable things. But I would say, if I'm betting today, if you're a politician today, you're probably going to come down on the more heavy-handed approach, right?
What I think is very tough. Look, I think there are challenges to both parties here. I'm happy to talk more about where I think things are tricky for Democrats. So we're not just totally.
Well, my latest column argues that Democrats are going to overreach on abortion. That'll have its own backlash.
Let's go there in just a second.
Okay.
But on the how Republicans can overreach side of the coin, I think what's really hard for Republicans is the rape exception issue. Because clearly, and I think even the most recent YouGov poll showed this. I don't have the number in front of me. But we also have recent history with Richard Murdoch and Todd Akin. Being against an exception for rape is not a politically strong position. Most Americans think that if a woman is raped, she should be able to have an abortion. And the argument against that is intellectually consistent.
Mm-hmm.
If life begins at conception and abortion is murder, the circumstances around the pregnancy are not relevant.
Yeah.
But if you acknowledge that a rape exception is okay, you're acknowledging that there are circumstances where you should not treat a fetus as a human life with constitutional rights. That there are other things that should supersede that. So once you
can still have a limit, though, on like a 15-week ban or something like that.
I mean, obviously you can make arguments for things in between those points. But my point is, I mean, I think from the fervent pro-life perspective, if you give on the rape exception, you are giving on the argument that it's not just simply a life, and other factors can supersede protecting that fetus. And of course, if you're pro-life, you're saying a baby. And so that makes it very hard for a fervent pro-lifer to do the political thing and give ground there. And that, I think, will make a number of Republicans politically vulnerable, particularly in these more purple places.
Yes.
So if you have anything to say to that, have at. Otherwise, we can shift to the Democratic.
I think we've talked about this before, years ago. Actually, I would just say that I think you make a valid point, and I think that politics is inherently messy, and we live in a fallen world. And I would just say, like, personally, the way I look at it is that, ironically, it's almost like a pro-choice. It's a thing where I think that you can say philosophically, life begins with conception, at conception, and also that politics is messy. The world is not perfect. There are bad things that happen. And we, for even just for pragmatic reasons, we have to make an exception for rape, and that does, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, right? I mean, that does create a certain inconsistency. But I think I'm pretty sure we're talking about like less than 1% of abortions.
What's
that
always
are
what's
rape.
so what's well, I mean, it's less than 1% of abortions that are, the third trimester, and I think only about 7% that are second trimester. Um, I'm sure this flows right into the Democratic
Yeah.
challenges. Democrats often have their toughest time talking about second, third term issues because they generally involve medical complications. So they're not very keen on letting that go. Ectopic pregnancies and other types of complications that put the mother's health or life at risk. They don't want to abandon those people, but in terms of just numbers of abortions, if you did stop, if you had a 20 or 24-week ban, you would be protecting the vast majority of abortions. But it's hard for Democrats to just sort of draw a line there and leave it alone because you have these other examples to worry about.
Yeah. So I think if you're in the world of politics, it is the art of the possible, and um, so that's where I come down on it. I do agree though that it creates it's if you think you're going to be able to go into this and be uh, so pure, and just like um, I think that banning having an abortion ban but allowing for an exception for rape will save the lives of millions of babies and protect and dramatically, protect the cause of life. And I think it's going to be more palatable and more likely to be enacted and preserved. So that would be my rationale. But I mean, there are pro-life people who'd be mad at me for saying that, I'm sure.
Well, I'm going to give you an opportunity. Give me your full argument why you think Democrats are the ones that are going to be vulnerable to overreach here.
Well, I think both sides are vulnerable to overreach. But I think that right now there was a sense in the wake of Roe being overturned that, wow, this is gonna change everything. As I thought a year ago initially that it would, and I don't think that's the case. And again, part of it's because people are show 3 or 4 months between now and the election, they're going to focus on something else. There's going to be another controversy. Donald Trump's going to do something tomorrow, and other reasons that I've expressed. But I also think part of it is that Democrats and progressives almost always overreach and do and say extreme things. And so, whether it is the potential for violence, where um, we saw crisis pregnancy centers being vandalized, in some cases firebombed. We saw an assassination attempt on Brett Kavanaugh. Stuff like that could certainly backfire against Democrats and progressives if it's ostensibly being done for the pro-choice cause. We've seen celebrities saying and doing sort of, I think, things that are out of touch with a lot of average Americans. The guy from Green Day saying F America and that he's renouncing his citizenship is just one example. And then we've seen politicians like Maxine Waters, say to hell with the Supreme Court, and AOC basically coming out with a whole laundry list of things, including court packing that she wants to do. So I think that you might not even know about this stuff, Bill, because you don't watch Fox News. But trust me, it's not just the progressive base that could get worked up about this. I mean, there's a version of this where you are watching. There's a version of this where you're a Fox News viewer, and you're like, you know what? For 50 years, we've had the Supreme Court impose this on us, and we've had to live under their rules. And finally, we get a win. We finally reverse this, and now they're going off the rails. And so I think that people who don't watch Fox News might not appreciate the potential for the backlash to have a backlash.
I would address. I would analyze this a little differently than you just did, because I mean, yes, there's always the ability for anyone on any side of the coin to say or do things that are out of the mainstream. I do think that when the main uh, the main political action that's been taken is one on the right. And the subsequent policies that are going to get enacted are coming from the right. Um, the issue of overreach is going to be focused on those actions. What policies have been put into place and how they affect actual individual people. That's if you have people saying I'm a rape victim and I was forced to have a baby in Texas. I think that's going to be a bigger news story than what a singer says on a concert stage in the UK.
Yeah.
Having said that, what you say about AOC, I think, is very relevant because it's not just her. You have various Democrats pushing for abolishing the filibuster, packing the court, which are things directed to Manchin and Sinema. We could be codifying Roe right now, but you're not letting us. We could be changing the court so we could just overrule this decision, and you're not letting us. So there's that aspect of it, and there's also the demands for the Biden administration to take executive action. You should be putting abortion clinics on federal lands or tribal lands at military installations that are federal jurisdictions within red states. And if you're hesitating on that, that shows that you're weak and you're not stepping up to the plate. And so when people say, "Gee, I'd love to codify Roe, but look, we just don't have the votes because Manchin and Sinema aren't going to move," or "Gee, that idea about abortion clinics is great, but there's this Hyde Amendment that's on the books, and we can't spend any federal money to provide abortions." Those types of hesitancies within existing norms that drives certain Democrats up the wall, and now you're having a debate within the Democratic Party. What's wrong with our party? Why isn't our party doing everything it possibly can? You had AOC share a video that was on MSNBC of two young abortion rights activists at a rally who were livid that they got a text from the Biden campaign asking for a donation right after the decision, and saying you could have codified Roe many times before this, and you didn't, as if Democrats literally had the votes to do it, even though because you can have a majority and not have the votes. But that, of course, that argument is not very satisfying to people on the left. But AOC is furthering and validating that argument and basically telling Democrats, you have to fix this. Don't blame these two young women. You need to change your behavior or expect to lose in November. So you have this inter-party debate going on when I would argue, why are you doing anything that is going to magnify existing rifts within the Democratic Party? We know there's a divide between the norm busters and the institutionalists. Why make that the argument right now when you could be uniting against the Republican governors and the Republican AGs and the Republican state legislatures, many of whom are in states where, again, what data we have are pro-choice states, even if they're technically red right now. You could be using this as an opportunity to make inroads and actually help facilitate a political realignment, but you got to be unified to do that. You can't succumb to internal division. That's where I'm concerned Democrats are not on that path right now. They're on the path to inter-party circular firing squad.
I mean, I think the other problem is that Democrats, what's going to happen is, if this remains a dominant issue, MSNBC and CNN are telling them what they want to hear. It's like if you're a Democrat or progressive, everyone you come in contact with agrees with you and is outraged by this decision. And they're passionate and they want you to do more. And they want you to ratchet up the rhetoric and to say more and to condemn this and to say, if you want an abortion, fly to New York. I'll put you up at my house. We're going to let you do it in an Indian reservation, whatever. That is not going to I think that that is a temptation to play to the audience because of these silos, these echo chambers. And there is a perverse incentive to ratchet up the rhetoric because everyone you talk to and everyone on your TV agrees with you and actually is pissed off that you're not doing more. And then you wake up on election day and you're like, how did we lose? How did we lose that election? Oh, all those people out there in America who aren't on Twitter, who care about inflation. Oh, those people that we lost again. We did it again. So that's kind of my take.
You know, what's hard about this, you know, just on the Republican side, it's hard for a Republican, I think, to support a rape exception because of the ramifications of that position. It becomes hard to explain to a diehard pro-lifer. On the Democratic side, like if you say, well, you should abolish filibuster to pass a law that would codify abortion rights. Well, one of the responses is, even if you had the votes for that, what makes you think this court is going to uphold that law? The bill, as it was initially drafted by Democrats, explicitly says Congress has the right to do this because of the Commerce Clause and because of the Necessary and Proper Clause and because of the Due Process Clause, the 14th Amendment. These are all things that this originalist court majority rejects as a basis for wide-ranging congressional power. They've done that in past decisions. Then, so you can say, well, look, even if you pass this thing, they're just going to overturn it. Well, then the response is, well, then you should pack the court. So that doesn't happen. Well, then if you pack the court, of course, once Democrats do it, then Republicans can do it. So you say, well, that's going to undermine the court as a basis for securing constitutional rights between political pendulum swings. They will no longer be things that are long term. They're going to be subject to political whims. And then, of course, the norm busting counterargument is, well, that's already obliterated. They've already overturned Roe. What's the point?
Yep.
And now you're stuck in a rabbit hole of are we at rock bottom or not? You know, yeah. I would argue this is very, 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 very bad, but I would still argue it could get worse if every right protected under the Constitution, buttressed by the Supreme Court, is no longer ever to be secured ever again. It would always be subject to political whims. But that's a hard argument to make right in the face of the Dobbs decision. But so it's hard. Even the Hyde Amendment thing. If Biden say, well, I can't break the law of the Hyde Amendment. If I broke the law, then who's to say Republicans won't break the law for this or that when they're in charge? Oh, well, he's already trying to do a coup. They don't respect the law as it is. So there's already this feeling that we're already at rock bottom for some on the left that makes it hard to argue that, you know, it still could get worse. As bad as this is, it still could get worse. And
it could always get worse, Bill.
And that there is a path forward. There is a pro-choice majority. It's maybe challenging to find what is the agenda that would unite the pro-choice majority. It probably isn't the AOC agenda. It probably isn't the DSA agenda. But there is some agenda out there that could unite the pro-choice majority. And if you found that, hey, guess what? Maybe you'd win some more Senate seats. Maybe you'd be in a better position to replace Alito and Thomas when the time comes, because you have a more secure Democratic Senate. But that seems so remote to people that it's hard to make that case. I mean, you couldn't make it definitive. You could never guarantee that's what's going to happen. So it's always going to be an imperfect argument. And that's why it makes the position of the institutionalists very, very treacherous right now.
Indeed. Well, on that happy note, if you like institutionalists, you should subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Matt Lewis, and you'll be notified. You can also check us out on the audio podcast, the DMZ Show, and follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show. You got anything to plug, Bill?
Nothing at the ready. I am working on this piece about how Democrats should focus on Republicans, you know, down ballot. But I don't think I have anything else that is hot to talk about.
All right. Well, stay tuned for that. Read my piece at The Beast about it. And we'll see you back here in the DMZ next week.
All right. Take care.
See you, Bill.